You often see books, courses, and videos claiming that they can teach you how to learn a new language, any language, in just 3 months. I even personally know people who make claims like this. But is it really possible, or is it simply marketing bullshit? Well, I've been learning foreign languages for more than 5 decades as an adult. I have studied languages while living, working, and traveling in many different parts of the world. These languages come from a wide variety of language families: Romance, Germanic, Slavic, and many others. I've also studied Greek, Chinese, Japanese, Indonesian, Hindi, Nepali, Korean, Tibetan, among others. Altogether, I've studied more than 50 languages, and I've used more than 30 of them for work, lecturing, academic study, travel, research, and communication. In addition, I've spent more than 10 years researching the psychological and attitudinal traits that influence success or failure in foreign language acquisition and cultural adaptation. So after all that experience, what is my answer? Can you learn a new language in 3 months? The honest answer is, it depends. That may not be as exciting as the promises made in advertisements, but before we can answer the question, we have to define 2 things. What does it mean to learn a language? And which language are we talking about? What does learning a language mean? That is the first major issue with the 3-month claim. When someone says, I learned Spanish in 3 months, what do they actually mean? Do they mean that they can introduce themselves, order food, ask for directions, and have a simple conversation? Do they mean that they can maintain a social conversation with the native speaker, even though they still make many mistakes? Or do they mean that they can study at a university, conduct business negotiations, teach academic subjects, write professional reports, understand humor and cultural references, and express complex ideas accurately? These are completely different goals. They require very different amounts of time, exposure, and effort. If learning a language means acquiring enough phrases and basic grammar to handle predictable situations, then yes, 3 months may be enough for some languages. With focused daily study and regular practice, many learners can reach a useful basic conversational level in that time. You may be able to introduce yourself, talk about your family and work, order in a restaurant, book a hotel, ask simple questions, and understand some common responses. This is real progress. It should not be dismissed. But it's not the same as mastering the language or even being able to function independently in a wide range of situations. The word fluency is also used far too loosely. Sometimes it simply means speaking without freezing. At other times, it means able to function professionally and express complex ideas naturally. Therefore, anyone who promises fluency in 3 months should first explain exactly what they mean by fluency. Without a clear definition, the promise means almost nothing. What language are you trying to learn? And which languages do you already know? Languages do not exist equal distances in terms of difficulty for a particular learner. If the new language is closely related to a language you already speak well, you may immediately recognize thousands of words. The languages may share grammatical structures, familiar sound patterns, similar ways of forming sentences, and a common cultural and historical foundation. These things can dramatically accelerate the learning process. For example, the first time I heard someone speak Slovak, I could already understand most of what they were saying. But I already spoke Polish, Croatian, and Russian well, and had experience with several other Slavic languages. I could communicate using a mixture of those languages. recognized familiar words and grammatical patterns, and began learning Slovak while I was actually using it in that conversation. In that sense, I was not starting from zero. I was simply adding another language to an existing Slavic framework in my mind. That is completely different from learning a language that has little in common with anything you already know. When I began studying Tibetan, for example, I did not have the same support. I could not rely on a large number of recognizable cognates or similar words. The sound system, grammar, writing system, patterns of expression, and cultural background were not familiar to me. Naturally, progress was much slower compared to Slovak. So, if an English speaker who already knows Spanish studies Italian intensely for 3 months, that person may make impressive progress. But if the same person begins studying Tibetan, Japanese, Arabic, or Thai without any previous experience with the related language, the results will be completely different. Saying that you can learn a language in 3 months ignores enormous differences. Previous language learning experience also matters. This is another factor that is often overlooked, and that is whether this is your first foreign language or your 10th. Seasoned language learners have already developed methods for recognizing patterns, remembering vocabulary, imitating unfamiliar sounds, tolerating ambiguity, and communicating despite gaps in their knowledge. They also tend to know what works for them. When I begin a new language today, I am not beginning with only the knowledge of my native language. I bring with me more than 50 years of language learning experience, as well as knowledge from many other languages. That previous experience can create shortcuts. If I recognize a grammatical pattern from another language, or if I encounter familiar vocabulary borrowed from Sanskrit, Arabic, Chinese, Latin, or another major source language, I can build connections much more quickly. A beginner learning a first foreign language does not yet have those advantages. Therefore, when an experienced polyglot says, "I learned this language in 3 months," that does not necessarily mean that another person can reproduce the same result under completely different conditions. We must also ask what 3 months actually represents. Did the person study for 20 minutes a day while living and working in an English-speaking environment? Or did the person spend several hours a day studying, live with native speakers, receive private lessons, and use the language constantly? 3 months of occasional study may amount to fewer than 30 hours of contact with the language. 3 months of intense immersion could amount to several hundred hours. Both learners can say they studied for 3 months, but the actual learning time is not remotely comparable. Motivation, access to native speakers, quality of instruction, opportunities for interaction, and the learner's emotional response to making mistakes also make a tremendous difference. Language learning is not purely an intellectual exercise. It is also psychological and social. Some learners are comfortable imitating unfamiliar sounds and temporarily presenting themselves in a new way. Others feel embarrassed because they think they sound foolish. Some people are willing to communicate with imperfect grammar. Others remain silent until they believe they can construct a perfect sentence. Some enjoy entering an unfamiliar culture and adapting to different ways of communicating. Others resist the cultural and interpersonal changes that come with using another language. In my research, I found that attitudes, personality traits, motivation, identity, empathy, and willingness to adapt to a new language and culture can strongly influence success. Two people can use the same textbook, attend the same classes, and spend the same number of hours studying, yet achieve very different results. This is another reason why universal 3-month promises are misleading. So, is it possible? Can you make enormous progress in a new language in 3 months? Absolutely. Can you acquire basic conversational skills in 3 months? Yes, especially if you study consistently, practice speaking, have realistic goals, and choose a language that is relatively accessible from languages you already know. Can you become comfortable communicating about familiar topics? In favorable circumstances, yes. Can some experienced learners reach a surprisingly high level in a closely related language? Certainly. But can anyone learn any language to advanced level in 3 months? No, that idea is absurd. If the claim is that anyone can become professionally competent or reach something close to mastery in any language after only 3 months, then we have moved from reasonable optimism to marketing fantasy. Instead of asking, can I learn a language in 3 months? I think we should ask, how much meaningful progress can I make in 3 months, given my goals, my previous language experience, the language I have chosen, and the amount of time and effort I can realistically invest? That is a much better question because it treats language learning as a continuing process rather than a product that can be completed by a particular deadline. 3 months can transform your relationship with a language. It can give you a strong foundation, allow you to feel your first real conversations, and demonstrate that the language is no longer inaccessible. But in most cases, 3 months should be viewed as the beginning of the journey, not the end. So beware of anyone who promises to make you fluent in any language in 3 months without first asking what language you already speak, which language you want to learn, what you mean by fluency, and how intensely you're prepared to work. If they cannot answer those questions, they're probably not describing language acquisition. They're selling a dream. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. If you would like to know more about my experience over the past 5 decades, learning and using more than 30 languages around the globe, with adventures in 101 countries so far, then please visit my website, polyglotdreams.com. There you will find my memoir, A Life in 30 Languages, translated in various languages and integrated with audio and dual readers to offer a great way to improve your target languages.